Daisy.
And I'm Terri.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 255. And this week it is Terri's turn to share something. Terri, what do you have?
Well, Daisy, as has been my norm recently, I looked for something new to us and something brief. So what I found is a podcast called TEDx Shorts, because I love TED Talks, but they're often longer, and I thought I'm just going to look for something short. And I actually found a podcast that is, kind of a condensed version of a TED Talk. So I was pretty excited about that. And this one is called 3 Ways to Make Better Decisions. And the TED Talk was by a gentleman named Tom Griffiths, who is a cognitive scientist in Sydney, Australia. Now, the only reason why being in Sydney, Australia might be really important in this is that his first example is about Sydney, Australia. Mm-hmm. And so he basically goes over 3 ways to make decisions, or 3 things that we might want to consider in making decisions. And I'm not sure that any of these will be groundbreaking for any of our listeners, but I thought they would be at least things that you and I could launch off and talk a little bit about.
Are they talking about significant decisions, all decisions, or to be decided, I suppose?
I would say both. He goes through examples of buying a house and choosing which restaurant to eat in. So
range.
Not necessarily all life-altering decisions. But so as a cognitive scientist, he looks a lot at how the brain works. How do we make decisions? What are human behaviors tied to decisions? And he said, if you need help deciding something, the people we should probably go to are computer scientists, because they look at how computers make decisions and they create ways to make decisions. So the first example he gives is, he says, look, if you're in Sydney and you want to buy a house, you know that this is a very complicated thing. There aren't many available. They're expensive, to rent or to buy, which is probably true in most places nowadays. And he described this first one as kind of a simple solution if you want to maximize the probability that you will find the best option. And that is, look at the 37% rule. So a little over 1/3. So what he used to describe this is, he said you would look at 37% of the homes available, and the next one you find that is the best one, you go with that. Because one, you can't look at 100% of what's available. And if you try to, you're going to miss out on most of them along the way, because if you don't act quickly, you're not going to get it. So again, this idea of cutting it down to 37%. He also talked about another way to apply this rule is you could even decrease the length of your decision-making process to the 37%. So if you were going to take 1 month to do this task, you need a house in 1 month, take 11 days to find your best option. Now, what he said about this is, it probably doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize this isn't giving you necessarily the best option, but it fails most of the time if it's only 37% accurate. But in reality, that's about as good as we can do.
Right.
And so looking at our decision-making as, I'm not going to make the right decision. I'm going to make the best decision based on what I'm capable of doing and what's available. So that was the first one. So then he uses the example of trying to figure out what restaurant to go to, because many of us face a lot of decisions in our lives that are pretty small, but they take up a lot of our time in thinking about. He then described this strategy as really the explore-exploit trade-off. So you have to make a decision of whether you're going to try something new or you're going to go to the restaurant that you already know that you like. This is one of those times where there's a way to help us make that decision. And he said, one, you have to kind of think about, and, he makes some assumptions here, but let's say, for example, I was on vacation. So explore means I'm going to see what's available. What other food exists here? And the exploit option would be, hey, we went to that place the other night and the food was amazing. We could go there. So he said one thing you would want to use in this type of example is some other questions to ask yourself. How long am I in town? If I'm only in town for a week, do I want to waste my time exploring and risking that I'm going to get some shoddy food? Or is it better to go with what I already know? Or if I'm going to stay there for a year, let's take time to explore, because that has another payoff of I will learn from the exploration and may find other ones I like rather than just sticking with the ones I already know. He then talks a little bit about this as far as human beings and the kind of life cycle. And he says, babies are really in the explore stage. When they're teething, they put everything in their mouth. They want to figure out, what's the thing that's going to feel the best on my teeth? Oh, that one works. Okay. He said, versus the old gentleman who goes to the same restaurant and orders the same food. He's not boring. He's just optimal. Like he's already figured it out. And now he doesn't have to make that decision. He's just optimized it. So using the explore, exploit method is another way that we make decisions. I think the other thing that's important about that, the explore, exploit, is you're also really considering how much time do I want to put into this decision making? I can go with the easy answer that I already know, or do I invest some time in exploring something else? So again, just some ways to think about how we use these different strategies. He then talks about, I don't think he used a name for this part, but he talked about, for example, if you're organizing your closet, or maybe even for some of us, you're deciding to get rid of things in your clothes closet, or you're organizing your paperwork for work or bills or whatever. And he says, someone came up with a pretty smart idea a while back. Her name was Martha Stewart. And she talked about if you're organizing your closet, you should ask yourself 4 questions. So her 4 questions are, what have I had the longest? Is it still functional? Is it a repeat or a replication of something else I have? And when have I last used it? And this is the part, he says, of her questions. The most important one is the last one. When have I last used it? So he goes back to talk about computer scientists and what they have figured out about computers is that one way to think about decision making is kind of how computers make decisions. And basically, computers have 2 types of memory. Fast memory that you can access, but you can't hold it for very long. And then slower, longer memory. So in this computer example, what they say is the stuff that was first in but longest out is the first to go. And so we just kind of encourage people to think about how we might apply this in our decision making. And the way this has really evolved is that the most effective process focuses on the items which have been least recently used. Get rid of those. You're not accessing those anymore. He then goes into this example of a Japanese economist who invented a filing system that uses this practice. And he got a cardboard box and he put his papers in it. And he put the ones that he had just used on the left and the ones that he hadn't looked at in a long time on the right. And every time he got one out, he would pull from the left because that was what he needed. And then he would put it back since he had just accessed it. So again, what is this telling us? The important stuff that he's going to be using is still here on the left. The stuff that's all the way on the right, he's not using anymore. He's hardly touching, but it's a way of organizing. Of course, this is a TED Talk, so he had to make it entertaining. So he makes some jokes along the way, and he says, now, please don't go home and use this system. You probably already have this system. It's called a stack of paper on your desk. Basically, the newest stuff is on top. And when you go to look for something, where do you look first? You look at the top of the stack because that's the stuff that you have most recently used and are still using. So, of course, he mentions, organizing your closet or organizing your papers are probably not the biggest decisions that you have to make. But looking at this way of making decisions might be helpful. And he talked about, in computers, the best algorithms about doing, making decisions is really the ones that take the least amount of time. So when computers face hard problems, they have to do different things to figure out the answers. They make them into simpler problems. They make use of randomness. They remove constraints, or they allow approximations. And one of the things he kind of wraps all of this up with is none of these guarantee the right answer, but they encourage us to use less energy to get as good a result as we can get. And for me, I think that was important because I can get very hung up on, but there's a right answer here. And if I keep researching, if I keep doing my due diligence, I will find the right answer. And there rarely is a one right answer. And I was thinking about some of what he was talking about in some of the, again, very minor decisions that I make in life. For example, last year I wanted to get new skis because I had started on very old, very small skis that I got at a resale place for $20. And it was time to buy some skis. So I did this with buying a bike too. I got on every website. I was on social media. I was reading reviews. I had it planned out. These are the best. This is the best deal. Here's where I can get these. And when it really came down to it, I'm not saying that research was wasted. Then maybe it was my time filler because I kind of enjoyed doing it. But that's not how I ended up making my decision. For 2 days, I went to the mountain and I demoed skis. And I think I did 2 pair of skis on one day and 2 pair the next day. So I tried 4, and they're all similar, but each ski is a little different. But I tried 4, found the one of those 4 that I liked, walked back in and asked the guy, all right, these are great. How much cash would you like for these right now? Because it was the end of the season. He wanted to get rid of them.
Yeah.
So I got skis that I love, and I got them for the best price imaginable. I could not have done that even with all that research I was doing. I was just kind of spinning my wheels. And so maybe I did the 37% in this example. I just looked at, a small slice of what was available, decided which one fit best, that made the most sense for me, and went with it. So I just thought this was kind of an interesting topic of how we make decisions in our life, from the small decisions to the larger decisions like buying a home, which I can tell everyone how I went about that with my partner, and it's probably not the best way to buy a home either.
So many of those decisions vary based on circumstances. It might vary how many available. Like, for example, when I was looking to get a place here, the budget was such that there was a very limited range of things that were available. And so I had to decide what was the most important. Well, having some outdoor space that wasn't shared and that was securable was an absolute deal breaker. So there was no point for me looking at first floor flats or, anything like that. They all had to be flats with a garden directly attached, because sometimes you'll have a flat that has a shared garden, or it has a part of a garden that you have to get to via, a shared path or something like that. I had to have a garden directly accessible via a door that was just mine, and I had to be able to secure it. So that greatly reduced the number even more. So, it was kind of making the best decision I could out of what was available from quite a limited pool in quite a restricted period of time, in a very difficult time to buy houses because it was during COVID. So, I couldn't go and see them and all those kind of things. So, sometimes we're not actually faced with a massive pool of choices, but still we come into that, having to make the best choice you can. And having things like a deal breaker list can help. The other thing I was thinking when you were talking about computers, and I don't even know if computers do this anymore. Do they still do the defrag process? I remember they used to. I'm not sure they do that anymore. But I can remember, certainly with older computers, I'm just trying to remember now. I'm just thinking if Macs do it. I don't think they do. So maybe no computers do it now, I'm not sure. But they used to. If your computer was getting a bit sluggish, one of the things you could do was to get it to defrag, which was basically defragmentation. It was taking out all the little bits. So it used to show you this kind of like long bar chart type thing with all the different types of files, and there'd be all these spaces in between. And it would go through the process, and however it did it, I don't know how it did it, but it removed all those gaps. So it condensed and made a better use of the space there was. So it wasn't actually getting rid of anything. So that sort of came to mind when you were talking about things like sorting out your closet and stuff like that. That just sometimes comes down to actually not having to make a decision about getting rid of anything. It might just be an organizational thing, better storage or just better ways of using the space you have without changing the amount of things you have. And then the next thing that always happens, and that certainly happens now, if you get that warning that your space is perilously close to filling up and they're either going to charge you for more storage space or the computer's getting too full or whatever it is, they'll give you a list of things that you might want to delete. They'll give you you can switch on like automatic delete, the bin after 30 days, different things like that will automate the process to thin things out a bit. But then they ask you about files to delete, and they'll usually give you the biggest ones first. So the ones that are taking up more space, the video files, for example, and they'll show you those first. This is going to be the quickest and easiest way to regain some of that storage, and then you're faced with something and you go through that decision process. Do I still want it? Or can I, oh yes, that's a wonderful video of a get together or my dogs or something like that. But I could maybe put it on an external hard drive and free up space on my computer, so there are ways you can do that. I just thought it was interesting when you mentioned computers about the ways that they offer you to optimize things.
And one way that I do that on my phone when I get that notice, and I have a ton of storage on my phone and I still get to that point where it's too full, is when I look at one of the sections that's always a lot of space being used is podcasts. And I realize I have so many of them that automatically download that I'm not listening to or haven't listened to in a while and are accessible to me without having them already on my phone. Yeah. So I quickly free up all that space, because if I want to go listen to that podcast, I can just go back to Spotify or wherever and pull it up. So it's helpful to me that they show, here's where all your space is being used up. And I can see, oh, that's not the best use of that space. Let me get rid of this stuff.
Yeah, one thing I discovered that reminds me, I think I got a warning along those lines. And I did the same thing. Yeah, they show you where are you draining the most. And unsurprisingly, Audible came up on mine. But I thought that's kind of weird, because I don't tend to just download a load of books. I might have a few that, there might be a non-fiction book that I'm dipping into now and then. And then there's the one that I'm reading, and I might have downloaded the next in the series or whatever. But I don't download loads. I only download what I'm reading now or what I might want to read when I'm out and about, because it's too slow to download when I'm out and about. So I thought that was odd. And then I discovered, because one of the things I do now is that when I finished a book, I put it in the archive. Previously, I think I was deleting them. And what I found a few times, I don't know if this has happened to you, but I've bought a book again and I'm listening to it and I'm thinking, hold on a minute, I've listened to this before. how did it let me buy it again when I've already bought it and listened to it before? So how come I've been able to buy it again? That doesn't make any sense. And I think it might be something to do with when you have one free. I'm not sure. But anyway, one of the ways I discovered I could avoid that happening for sure was to archive the books. And then it's there in the system. But what I discovered was that you put them in the archive, but even if they're finished, they're still there as the whole book, taking up space. I didn't realize that. So I went into the archive and I went through them all and I removed them. You have to remove them from device and then put them in the archive. So they're there as a record in the archive, but they're not taking up space. So that was a way. And I went through and I spent half an hour doing that and suddenly freed up a monumental amount of space.
Yeah.
So sometimes there are these little tips and tricks that you just stumble upon that help you organize, help you make decisions.
Awesome.
Because I don't have to make the decision about whether to keep it or not. I can render it basically nil from a storage point of view and still keep it.
The other thought I had about the decision making is, and I don't know if I would use any of these strategies necessarily, but is thinking about accepting that there won't be a right decision, but how can I optimize what decision I can make? And so this might even be, so you've talked about buying a house. We've talked about what to get rid of on our phone or those kinds of things. But maybe even, should I do this event? Should I do this opportunity? Should I take advantage of this webinar or whatever? How do we decide things like that?
Oh, I thought you were going to give me the answer as well.
Oh, no, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I suppose I'm thinking along the lines of the things that came up, the 3 different ways. And I suppose the first one doesn't really come into it unless you're being offered a huge choice of ones to choose from. The explore, exploit, I suppose, is it something that I know about already that I want to learn more about, or is it something new? But yes, again, I suppose, is it something new with somebody new that I don't know anything about that could end up being really valuable or not? There's more of a risk, isn't there, in the explore, where the exploit has a bit more of a safe feel to it, going with somebody that you've seen before and, something that you already know about. But then you're limiting the expansion of knowledge.
But I think even with that, Daisy, for me, then I would add in some other things like cost.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it's inexpensive,
cost benefit,
and I'm not sure about this person who's leading the webinar or something, I might be more likely to take that risk. If it's more expensive, I might only choose people that I've already followed or have already been to some of their trainings, because of that cost risk benefit of, this person's a known person to me and I'm willing to invest more. But if the price was lower, then I might be more likely to explore something I haven't done before.
Yeah, I think the whole risk reward balance is a common one that goes into things, isn't it? I was thinking about, and I asked you right at the beginning, are these big questions or small questions? I was just thinking a funny one that we've spoken about before, that I think probably the 37% rule would be very appropriate for. And that is deciding what to watch on TV. Because there is so much now, isn't there, to look for. I can often spend half an hour trying to decide something, and then I get to the end of it, oh, sod it, I'll just carry on listening to my audiobook because I can't decide. Mm-hmm. So it would kind of be better to think, right, yeah, I've got an hour and a half before bedtime or whatever, so I'm looking for a show that's going to be for an hour or a couple of half an hour episodes or whatever it was. But let's just limit. Let's just look on one channel or one platform. Mm-hmm. And, let's only spend 5 minutes. And I suppose you get into a bit that explore, exploit, because do you go with another episode of something you've already started watching, or a show that you know that you like that's another series, or do you start something new? Lots of things come into play and can sometimes end up with us so bogged down and be so time consuming that you never end up making a decision at all. You just, I'll do something else. But you've wasted half an hour trying to make that decision.
I shared this on social media many years ago, but it was a pie graph, and it was about how I choose what to watch on Netflix or whatever, or it was what I watch on Netflix. And there was a very small slice that was, a show. And then like 92% of the whole pie graph was time I spend trying to decide what to watch on these things. But you're right. And for me, it's also about, even as I'm deciding, how many episodes are there? Is this one that's new and it's being dripped out one episode per week? Yeah. Are there 40 episodes I can watch? And in that, I probably even think about, how likely am I maybe to become addicted to this show? Because if I only have an hour before I want to go to sleep, I might get caught watching 6 episodes of this thing if I really get into it. And so there are all those decisions about how much time do I have? How do I optimize that time?
Yeah, I wonder, it would be funny, wouldn't it, if there was some little part of our brain that could keep account of how much time we spend making decisions and how much time you wasted. I mean, you were saying about choosing the skis, and you spent a lot of time researching, and you put that little caveat in there, but I quite enjoyed the process. So that wasn't time wasted, even if you didn't use any of it. But of course, that knowledge would have factored into the skis that you chose to demo.
That's right.
You already had an idea of the choices you'd want to make. But on the day, you restricted that.
And of course, I'm always looking at ski equipment. There are a couple of companies that I really want to buy their skis based on their business practices and things. But like one of them is in northern Michigan, which is very far from where I live. They're not commonly used here, so there's no way I'm going to get to demo them. So I'd be having to make this expensive purchase with no actual information except I really like their beautiful skis. I love what they say about them, and I like their business practice. But that feels like a total crapshoot that's expensive. Again, whereas mine, I got at the end of the season. They're great skis. Are there better skis? Probably. But I got them at such a good price that in a couple years, a year or so, I'm going to outgrow them anyway. Great, low risk, high risk for me to make this decision to go with this other model that just sounds so good, but I have no way of knowing what they feel like. And so to me, that's another part of this whole decision making, kind of like what you said with buying your house. Which things are most important to me? Do I like their business practice? Do I like that it's a privately run, they're going to hand make these skis, or I'm going to get some off an assembly line from one of the big manufacturers? Is that more important to me? Or the cost and getting to ski on them? Which things are of higher value to me?
Yeah, and then other factors that come into play, like timing, whatever. I mean, look what happened when my car got written off and I had a very limited time. They gave me a hire car. It wasn't my fault. But suddenly, after 2 weeks of the hire car, your car's written off. We're going to give you a week to decide what to do. And I had to get a new car. So making a decision, I'd already thought about when I changed this car, which I hadn't planned to do for ages. I want to change to a different car. I'd been very wed to that type of car. I'd had 2 very similar in a row, but wanted something different. A conversation that I had with my brother at the weekend, sort of, he used to have one of these cars. Sounds good. So that sort of decision was made. looked around where they were, but very pressed on time. I could have gone nuts on researching and looked into different kinds of cars and all the rest of it. But no, sometimes you've just got to make the best decision that's available in a certain period of time, and to really limit yourself and just, like you say, go with the best decision that you can within certain restrictions.
Absolutely.
Is it the right one? Who knows? It was the right time with all those factors at play.
And I've always said this, like when I was a therapist, I've always said this to clients. If we get too hung up on making the right decision, we'll probably never be able to make one, because we can never gather all of the information. And information changes even after we make that decision. And so to me, the important thing is recognizing the flexibility of most decisions we can change later. So if this car isn't the one that you most love, it's okay, because guess what? You're going to get another car at some point.
Yeah.
And I remember one time when I was looking at cars, I was so caught up on which color. Man, I love that color I test drove, but that's going to show dirt so much. Maybe I should get this color. And I agonized, not over whether to buy the car, but which color. And I finally got to the point where I just had to say to myself, there's no one right decision. Go with what feels right now, because how you talk to yourself afterward is going to tell you whether it was a good decision. If I got the blue one and then said, oh, there's so many blue ones of these, Terri, that was dumb. You should have gotten the red one. Well, now I'm going to feel bad about that decision. But if I focus on, look at that, there's a lot of these. This is a really nice color. Now I'm going to feel good about the decision. So how I talk to myself, or how I process the decision afterward, is also going to influence whether I feel good about the decision or not.
Yeah, good point. So there's a lot that goes into all sorts of decisions.
And there are lots of little TED Talks that you can listen to in an abbreviated form. So I encourage people also to maybe check out this TEDx Shorts.
Very good. Well, until I see you next time, I hope you have a very wonderful week.
Take good care, everyone.